Karen sprayed my brother for playing music. She froze when I flashed my CIA badge. They say evil doesn't always come in dark cloaks. Sometimes it shows up with a garden hose and a smug grin. I never thought returning home for a break would lead to national headlines. But then again, I never expected Karen Bradshaw. My name is Kendra Wallace. I'm a 34-year-old field liaison for a certain three-letter agency. Yes, that one. After 5 years working covert operations abroad, I came home to Woodridge Estates to help care for my younger brother, Marcus. He's only 16, a sweet, talented kid who dreams of becoming a sound engineer. Music is his outlet, his joy, his way of surviving high school in a predominantly white, tight-lipped suburb. The first time we saw Karen, she walked straight onto our property. No knock, no introduction, just a clipboard and a scowl. "This isn't a daycare," she snapped, glaring at the solar lights Marcus had strung for his backyard DJ setup. I smiled politely. She didn't. Then came the warnings. Noise complaints, unauthorized gathering, a formal letter from a so-called home beautification committee, a fake HOA she ran solo out of a Facebook group. I checked. Our street isn't even zoned for one. We ignored her. We tried. But Karen escalated. That afternoon, I was on a call with DC when I heard screaming from outside. I ran to the porch and froze. There was Karen, standing in the middle of our front lawn, blasting Marcus with a full-pressure garden hose. His Bluetooth speaker lay cracked on the cement, sputtering and sparking. His hoodie clung to him like a second skin. His hands trembled, not from water but humiliation. I didn't say a word. I stepped between them, slowly, deliberately. My hand went to my purse, not for pepper spray, but for the leather badge case I hadn't shown anyone in Woodridge. "Ma'am," I said, voice low, "you just committed assault on a minor, on federal property." She laughed until I flipped the badge open. Her face went white. "You're bluffing," she hissed. "I wasn't." That night, Karen's hose attack went viral. One of the neighbors had recorded everything: the water, the screaming, my badge. The comments rolled in like thunder. "She should be arrested. You don't mess with the CIA. That poor boy. Why is she even allowed near kids?" Local news ran it. Then national. Karen claimed she was defending property values. But the truth came out fast. She wasn't on any HOA board. She'd printed fake citations, harassed 4 other families, lied about permits. Worse, she'd tampered with the community server used for neighborhood alerts. I went digging. The CIA teaches you to track patterns. Karen had a pattern. Back in 2018, she was fined for impersonating a code enforcement officer in another county. Then again in 2021, she'd staged complaints to push out a black family down the block. I pulled public records, cross-referenced security footage. It all fit. By the time we filed a restraining order, I'd already contacted the DOJ. Neighbors turned. The family next door, who'd been silent for months, put up a sign that said, "We stand with Marcus." Karen was arrested within a week. Multiple counts: harassment, impersonation of authority, destruction of property, and assault. She was dragged from her faux committee meeting in handcuffs. Even then, she screamed that those people are ruining the neighborhood. But by then, the neighborhood had already made up its mind. Woodridge changed. Music flowed freely. Kids skateboarded without glares. One of Marcus's classmates, a shy Latino boy, told us, "I can breathe now." I never imagined my badge would be used on home soil for something so human. But justice doesn't only happen in war zones. Sometimes it starts with a hose and ends with a badge. The silence after Karen's arrest didn't feel like peace. It felt like the breath a town takes before it erupts. Marcus didn't go back to school for 3 days. Not because he was afraid, he was angry. My brother has always had a quiet fire in him, but this time, it was roaring just beneath his skin. He sat on the porch for hours more, staring at the cracked speaker she'd smashed. I offered to buy him a new one. He shook his head. "I don't want to replace it. I want people to see what she did." By then, the video had hit 6 million views. Karen's face wrinkled, snarling. Hose aimed like a weapon was seared into the internet's memory. The moment she saw my badge had become a meme. Someone slowed the clip, added dramatic music, and titled it, "When the HOA Meets the CIA." TikTok ate it up, but not everyone was laughing. 3 days after the video went viral, I found a letter stuffed in our mailbox. No stamp, no return address. The handwriting was careful, like someone trying too hard to seem polite. "You don't belong here. You're making this neighborhood unsafe. Take your music and your people and go back to where you came from." I handed it to Marcus. He didn't flinch. "Let's make them hear us louder," he said. So we did. Marcus organized a block party, not one of those HOA-sanctioned lukewarm lemonade events. No, this one had bounce houses, food trucks, a local DJ, and a pop-up art station where kids could paint what community meant to them. I invited every neighbor, even the ones who had looked away, and people came. They showed up in folding chairs and Dodgers caps. They brought casseroles and tamales and homemade sweet tea. A dozen teens danced in the cul-de-sac while Marcus DJ'd from a brand new setup that a local music store had donated anonymously. An elderly Korean couple brought watermelon slices and watched the kids with soft smiles. Not everyone showed up. Karen's old clique, 3 women who used to patrol the street with wine tumblers and gossip, sat behind their curtains. One of them peeked out with binoculars, but the majority they celebrated. They chose to stand with us. Later that night, Marcus performed an original mix, right there on our driveway. It sampled snippets of Karen's rants, her screeching about property values, and too much bass layered with soft piano, and a beat that dropped like thunder. People cheered, and that's when the second video went viral. A drone flew overhead, no one knew who sent it, capturing the whole party, the crowd, the music, the flags. The moment Marcus held up the cracked speaker and said, This isn't trash. It's proof we don't back down." He wasn't a victim anymore. He was the face of something bigger. The next morning, I got a call from a blocked number. Standard in my line of work. "Agent Wallace," the voice said, "we've received complaints about your media presence." I waited. And unofficially, the man said, "Keep going." Turns out, Karen's arrest had opened a file, a very old one. Back in 2016, she was part of a developer-backed group trying to gentrify South Pasadena using fake citations, police impersonation, and forced inspections to evict low-income families. No charges stuck, but witnesses remembered. A few had moved here, so I started asking questions. Neighbors forwarded me emails Karen had sent under a different name. Kea B. Rogers, HOA safety advisor. She'd signed fake warnings, claimed code violations that didn't exist, used language that mimicked city policy. She'd created her own bylaws and claimed they came from the district office. There was no district office, and it wasn't just us. A black couple 3 blocks over had received threats about their lawn decorations. An Asian American family was cited for having non-neutral roof tiles. A single Latina mom had her recycling bin accidentally removed 5 times. I compiled everything. Then I called in a favor. Miles Taggart, DOJ Community Affairs. We trained together at Langley. He owed me from Berlin. He met me at a diner off Ridgeway Boulevard. Small booth, neutral ground. When I laid out the files, he leaned back, whistled. "She built a shadow HOA. I nodded. Looks like she got comfortable. Too comfortable. He took the folder. "Give me 2 weeks. It only took 9 days. By then, Karen had posted bail. She was back, not smug, but seething. She wore sunglasses like armor. Her yard signs came down, but her mouth didn't stop. She assaulted me. She told a local tabloid I was defending my neighborhood. She didn't know the investigation had already spread to 2 counties. Karen wasn't just annoying. She was part of a multi-property intimidation ring, using beautification codes to pressure families out. Her cousin owned a renovation firm. Her nephew ran a property flipping LLC. A pattern emerged and it was ugly. The DOJ moved fast. 2 arrests, 3 subpoenas. Karen's committee was officially labeled a fraudulent organization. Her bank accounts were frozen, her fake citations nullified. And best of all, a class action suit was filed in Superior Court. Marcus was listed as plaintiff number 1. But even justice can feel hollow when you've lived in fear. The night before the first hearing, Marcus knocked on my door. He held the speaker still cracked, still water damaged but wrapped in LEDs. "I don't want to win just in court," he said. "I want to win in their hearts." I stared at him. "Then speak." I said, "Tell them. Tell everyone." So we planned something, bigger than a press conference, more powerful than a post. We held a community event called Unmuted, a night of open mic, music, and memory. It wasn't just Marcus. It was the other kids Karen had silenced, the families she tried to drive out, the voices she underestimated. Marcus told his story, calm, clear, brave. He ended with a line that still echoes in my chest. "You can break a speaker, but you can't stop the sound." The crowd gave him a standing ovation. Even the mayor showed up. By the next day, every news outlet in the region had picked it up. Karen was done. Her real estate license revoked. Her assets seized. Her name a cautionary tale in suburbia. But what mattered most, Woodridge changed. The first real crack in Karen's world wasn't legal, it was social. It came on a quiet Tuesday morning when Mrs. Farnsworth from 2 doors down taped a handwritten sign to her front window. It read, "We apologize to the Wallace family. We stood by too long. Never again." Within days, others followed. The Johnsons placed solar lanterns shaped like musical notes on their lawn. The Rodriguezes printed shirts that said "Unmuted with Marcus." Even the uptight couple with the hedges, shaped like swans who never said more than 2 words, walked over with banana bread. Karen had spent years cultivating fear, compliance, silence. But the silence was broken, and with it came evidence. The tip came from an unexpected place, a teenager named Brandon Mikeson. Brandon lived 2 blocks away, in a house that used to have solar panels. Used to, he sent me a DM. "She told my mom we'd be fined unless we decluttered the roof." Then a month later, her nephew bought the house next door for cash. We didn't realize it until now. "Can I talk to someone?" I called Miles. He'd already found something similar. Karen hadn't just been weaponizing fake citations. She was targeting families, mostly immigrants and people of color, with pressure campaigns, noise complaints, property violations, threatening letters that looked official. It wore them down. Then came the cash offers, always below market, always from a shell company. But now, the shell companies were unraveling. And at the center of it all, a group called Wellington Civic Solutions LLC, registered in Nevada, controlled by 2 members of Karen's extended family. We were looking at a coordinated displacement scam. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was the tip of a spear designed to remove families who didn't fit. And my family had become the one she couldn't break. I still remember the morning it all blew open. Channel 5's reporter stood in our front yard, holding a stack of documents I'd leaked anonymously. Sources confirmed that Karen Bradshaw, arrested last week for assault and harassment, is now under federal investigation for real estate fraud, harassment, and conspiracy to intimidate homeowners. They aired drone footage from the block party, spliced it with Marcus's speech, then played the leaked audio Karen on a call with her cousin, saying that DJ Kid's house is next. "I don't care what it takes. We'll make it so miserable they'll beg to sell." She had no idea she'd been recorded by a neighbor who once considered her a friend. Her voice echoed across every news app in the country. At school, Marcus was called into the principal's office, but not for punishment. They wanted him to speak at the District Equity Summit. At first, he hesitated. "She tried to erase me," he told me. "Why would I want to be visible now?" I looked at him. "Because some kids still feel erased, and they need someone they can see." He agreed. The summit was streamed, watched by over 30,000 students. And when Marcus said, "We don't need to be quiet to be safe," the auditorium erupted. I sat in the back, tears in my eyes. Karen may have cracked his speaker, but she amplified his voice. Meanwhile, DOJ agents were combing through bank accounts, fake notices, and HOA dues that had gone missing. They interviewed over 30 residents, subpoenaed emails, found a document titled Community Reclamation Strategy. It wasn't subtle. It laid out a plan to restore neighborhood heritage by pushing out non-aligned families using a mix of social pressure and municipal loopholes. Karen's signature was at the bottom, and that's when the story went national. Fake HOA fraudster exposed targeted families for profit. Ex-CIA agent turns whistleblower. After brother attacked by neighborhood watch queen, my face was on the news. So was Marcus. Karen's mugshot was everywhere, pale, furious, disheveled. But behind the headlines, the damage was real. Families had moved, lives disrupted, trust broken. We needed more than exposure. We needed justice. That's when we met Daryl McMillan. He was a retired black judge who had been pushed out of his previous home 5 years ago after his dog was accused of being too aggressive. His house sold below market. He'd assumed it was random until he saw Karen's face on TV. He drove down to Woodridge and knocked on my door in person. "I want in," he said. On what I asked? On the lawsuit. Turns out, Daryl had tracked Karen's pattern too. He'd compiled records of 14 suspicious sales in 4 counties, all linked to Karen's family's LLCs. With his help, the case expanded into a civil rights suit. We weren't just pressing charges for harassment. We were exposing systemic displacement. By the time Karen went to her first court appearance for the original assault charge, protesters lined the courthouse steps. They weren't yelling. They were playing music. One speaker, one song. Marcus's original mix, the one that sampled Karen's own words and turned them into rhythm. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Inside, Karen's attorney tried to argue she was a concerned citizen, misunderstood. But when the judge played the audio clip, her voice saying, "We'll make it miserable," even the defense slumped. Karen was remanded without bail. The judge called her a danger to the civic trust of this community. A week later, Marcus and I sat in the backyard, looking up at the stars. He asked, "Do you think she knew how much she was hurting people?" I thought about it. I think she knew. She just didn't think anyone would fight back. He nodded slowly. "I'm glad we did." Me too. Because the real win wasn't that Karen got arrested. It was that Marcus never stopped being loud. You'd think her fall would have come all at once, a dramatic courtroom moment, handcuffs, gavel bang. But karma rarely works in neat little endings. For Karen Bradshaw, it was a slow, public unraveling. After her bail was revoked and she was taken back into custody, the courtroom emptied in a stunned hush. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, motionless, as if she couldn't believe her carefully curated suburban empire was cracking beneath her sensible shoes. But the real fallout hadn't even started. 3 days later, the Department of Justice held a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse downtown. I was there. So was Marcus. So were the other families she had tried to drive out. Behind the podium stood U.S. Attorney Luis Ortega, calm, unshakable. He looked over the crowd and said, "Today, we announce formal federal charges against Karen Bradshaw for conspiracy to commit fraud, civil rights violations, and impersonation of government authority in furtherance of an illegal displacement scheme. She exploited the appearance of neighborhood order to terrorize marginalized families using fake HOAs, fabricated citations, and harassment masked as civic duty. We will not allow this to stand." The press went wild. CNN ran the story within the hour. NBC followed. Even The Atlantic published a headline, "The HOA Queen Who Tried to Gentrify a Suburb and Lost to a Teen DJ and His CIA Sister." I never wanted fame. Neither did Marcus. But justice needed a face. And now it had two. Over the next week, Karen's carefully guarded web of influence unraveled like an old sweater. First, her real estate license was permanently revoked. Then her bank assets were frozen under suspicion of laundering funds through Wellington Civic Solutions, LLC. And then came the class action lawsuit, a coalition of 18 families, all victims of her threats, her intimidation, her lies. Each one had a story. Each one had receipts, Some had left their homes out of fear, others had lost equity, a few had uprooted their kids entirely, but all of them were ready to fight. We held meetings in our living room. Some nights, there were too many chairs. Other nights, too many tears. But in the center of it all was Marcus 16, soft-spoken, determined. He spoke less like a victim and more like a leader. Even the lawyers took notice. He became the lead plaintiff. The courtroom was packed the first day of the civil trial. Karen had traded her signature pastel blazers for a gray suit and thinly veiled disdain. She no longer looked smug. She looked cornered. Her lawyer tried every trick in the book. Misunderstood civic engagement. Passionate but misguided enforcement. A simple neighborhood dispute blown out of proportion. But the prosecution brought heat. They showed email chains between Karen and her cousin, mapping out which homes to target. They revealed spreadsheets tracking the churn potential of homes owned by people of color or single parents. Karen's voice echoed through the speakers again. We just need to make it uncomfortable enough. They'll go. The courtroom went still, and then came the witness testimonies. First was Mrs. Tran, whose bilingual welcome sign was called un-American in an anonymous complaint Karen wrote. Then came Mr. Ruiz, whose children's swing set was a code violation until his house was mysteriously purchased by Karen's nephew 6 months later. Then a middle school teacher, a veteran, a retired nurse. Each story chipped away at the illusion Karen had built that she was just keeping the neighborhood nice. She wasn't. She was building a private empire on the backs of marginalized families. And now, it was burning down. When Marcus took the stand, the courtroom leaned forward. He wore a simple button-up. No chains, no logos, just his voice. He told them about the hose, the speaker, the humiliation, but also about the aftermath, the strength he found, the community he built, the other kids who reached out to him after the videos. He ended with this: Karen tried to drown out our voices. But now the whole world's listening, and we're not going anywhere. Even the judge looked moved. Karen didn't speak during the trial, not once, but her silence spoke volumes. The verdict came down after 8 days of proceedings. Liable on all counts. The court awarded $2.7 million in damages to the affected families. Karen collapsed into her chair when the ruling was read. Her lawyer looked like he aged 10 years in a second. But that wasn't the final blow. The DOJ still had their case, and they had something new: a whistleblower. Turns out, Karen's assistant Brittany, early 20s, anxious and pale, had seen everything. She'd typed up the citations, filed the fake notices, but she'd also kept backups, encrypted files, photos of meeting notes, even audio clips of Karen bragging that half these people don't even know their rights. Brittany testified before the grand jury in exchange for immunity. Karen was indicted on 5 more counts of federal conspiracy. She was escorted out of her home in cuffs. Again. This time, it made national news. The footage showed her trying to cover her face, but there was no hiding anymore. Back in Woodridge Estates, something unexpected happened. People started painting their fences with color, putting up welcome signs, leaving fruit baskets on doorsteps. A group of parents organized a block-wide art mural for the kids. This is our neighborhood. The mural featured speakers, music notes, handprints, and a massive oak tree with roots that stretched across all the homes. Marcus added a cracked speaker at the bottom corner. It became the symbol of resilience. Karen pled guilty to avoid trial. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, with no chance of early release due to the pattern of civil rights violations and orchestrated fraud. At sentencing, the judge said, "You created a regime of fear masked as order, but fear is not community, and your actions will echo as a warning for every HOA across the country." Karen said nothing. She looked at Marcus once, but he didn't flinch. We walked out of that courtroom with the sun on our faces. "Feels different," Marcus said. "What does?" I asked. He smiled. "Like we're free. There's a silence in Woodridge now, but not the kind that comes from fear. It's the kind of quiet that holds space. For music. For children laughing. For late-night porch talks and neighbors bringing you pie just because it's Thursday, it's the silence after the storm. Karen Bradshaw was gone, not just from our street, but from the entire state system, transferred to a federal facility in Arizona, where she'd be serving 18 years without parole. No plea bargains, no Facebook groups to moderate, no power to pretend she belonged in anyone's business. And for the first time since we moved here, my brother Marcus could play his music without looking over his shoulder. The change wasn't instant. People didn't wake up the day after her sentencing and become best friends, but something inside them, inside all of us, had shifted, and Woodridge slowly became a different place. It started with the small things. Marcus held his first open DJ session on the front lawn, inviting any kid who wanted to learn to join him. By the second weekend, there were 9 kids, some shy, some loud, all smiling, messing around with cables and remixes. A family from 3 blocks over offered to build him a little sound booth out of leftover decking wood. Someone else donated a string of garden lights. One elderly neighbor even knitted a custom dust cover for his new turntable. The cracked speaker Karen had destroyed, Marcus mounted it like a trophy above his booth. On the casing, in black paint, he wrote, "She tried to silence me, but I made it louder. I resumed my remote work for the agency. My superiors let me stay in Woodridge, said my presence here had strategic value." In truth, I think they just knew something real was happening here. Something that couldn't be monitored by satellite feeds or listening stations. A new kind of community intelligence. So I stayed, but I didn't just monitor. I built. Woodridge didn't have a real neighborhood association before Karen's fake one. But now that people saw what not to do, they started asking, what should it look like? A group of residents formed a task force. Multi-generational, multiracial, transparent, accountable, and they asked me to chair it. At first, I hesitated. "Is this a good idea?" I asked Marcus one night while we washed dishes. He grinned. "You took down a suburban tyrant with a badge and a binder. I think you'll do fine." So I agreed on one condition: no fences unless they're built to protect, not divide. The first meeting of the new Woodridge Community Council was held under a string of warm lights on the lawn next to the mural wall. We opened with a moment of silence, not for Karen, but for the homes she disrupted. Then, we moved forward. We voted on shared garden plots, on monthly block events that included music, food, and storytelling. We created a community pantry at the edge of the park. Take what you need, leave what you can, and we developed an official neighborhood charter, reviewed by real attorneys, ensuring transparency, equality, and dignity. No resident could be fined, ticketed, or threatened over non-criminal matters. Instead, we'd resolve disputes through conversation, mediated by rotating volunteer committees. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Marcus was invited to speak at a national housing conference in Chicago. A 16-year-old with a cracked speaker and an iron heart, standing before a room of politicians and activists. He told them communities don't fall apart because people are different. They fall apart when one person decides they have the right to control everyone else, and nobody says no. He got a standing ovation. By the time he flew home, he had 3 scholarship offers from music programs and 1 internship with a civil rights nonprofit. He still played in our driveway, still smiled at the neighbors who used to look away. But now, when he smiled, they smiled back. And then one morning, 6 months after Karen's sentencing, we woke up to something unexpected. A letter in the mailbox, typed, no return address, but signed in trembling cursive, from Brittany, Karen's former assistant, the one who'd turned whistleblower. The letter read, "Dear Wallace family, I'm sorry, I knew what she was doing was wrong. I helped her make those forms. I didn't know how to stop her. But when I saw your brother soaked and humiliated on the news, I remembered being his age, and I couldn't let it go. I hope someday he can forgive me. I want to do better. I want to help build something instead of tear it down. Thank you for standing up, even when everyone else stayed quiet." We never did find out where Brittany ended up, but I framed the letter and hung it next to Marcus's speaker. Looking back now, The story people remember is always the same Karen with her hose. My badge. The moment everything changed. But that was just the spark. The real transformation came later through dozens of small choices, hard conversations, unlikely friendships, through the courage of a teenager who wouldn't let injustice define him, and through a neighborhood that finally learned how to listen. 2 weeks ago, Marcus asked if we could throw a party, not a protest, not a statement, just a party. So we did. We called it Woodridge Unplugged. No cameras, no live streams, just neighbors. People danced barefoot on the lawn. Kids chased bubbles through the sprinklers. Someone brought a homemade speaker that played actual vinyl. Marcus DJ'd the last song of the night, no remixes, just Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. He stood there, hands on the turntable, eyes closed, and when the last note faded, no one spoke. They didn't need to. We won't forget Karen, not because we want to relive the hate, but because we refuse to pretend it didn't happen. Because remembering why we changed is how we make sure we don't go back. There's a phrase I once heard in training: silence is not the absence of sound. It's the space where voices choose to rise. Marcus chose to rise, and in doing so, so did we all. So if you drive through Woodridge today, you won't see perfect hedges or quiet driveways. You'll see kids chalking poetry on sidewalks. You'll hear music sometimes too loud, always joyful. You'll see a mural that tells a story of pain, resistance, and community. And somewhere in the corner of a little front yard, you'll see a cracked speaker, still standing, still proud, still speaking. The end.